Welcome, family and friends, to another Empathy with Nature, Thinking Like a Plant, where we explore perspectives and practices to reconnect to the true nature of nature. Very excited tonight because I feel a breakthrough in this material that I've been researching, well, with the Nature Institute, the program there, but actually for several years as well. And I'm very excited to move forward with new practices and perspectives. But before we do that, by way of a brief recap of the previous session, I want to look at and actually do the seed observation again that we did. So you missed it last time, but you'll get it tonight. To make sure that people are understanding this exercise correctly. And the reason for this is because you might discover there's more to this exercise than meets the eye, because it's actually more powerful than what meets the eye. It's definitely much more than just contemplating a seed, right? It looks like we're contemplating a seed, but there's a lot of moving parts to this exercise. We know that we were contemplating a seed to compare it with something that was not a seed, which could be like a fake copy of a seed, to compare the difference in the feel, the resonance of the seed and the copy. But that's just one step in this exercise that we did. But before I break down that exercise into its different steps, let me first ask the question. When you're doing this exercise, who is doing it? Who's doing it?
Me?
Me? Yeah. I am. You are. Me. Right. I am. The I is a doer. The I is doing something. And so the efficaciousness of this exercise really rests on the ability of the I in you to do something. But who is this I? Let's explore that for a moment, this mystery of the I. We know that the I is also a beer, a doer and a beer, because I am a being. I be. I want everyone to say, I am.
I am.
Okay. Now, when you say I am, again, I want you to point somewhere in the room. I am. I am. Okay. Great. You're pointing different places in the room. So do it again, and this time point where you would normally point when you say I am.
I am.
I am. Don't point into your eye. I am in my eye. So, yeah, you're pointing at yourself because you are this I am. And this I am carries this awareness of itself, or self-awareness. It's awareness of being, and I am. So in this practice, we want to work from the place of this I, because this I is not only a beer, it is a doer. It is doing something. Even though I sometimes hear in the New Age community people saying, oh, just stop all the doing and just be, right? Because being is where it's at, and being is spiritual, but doing is not spiritual. But we need to do in order to be, right? Like to become. There is a coming in order to become. There's something happening, some sort of activity in order to become. And is this not a lesson from the Book of Nature? The Book of Nature, which might even be called the Gospel according to nature. We can call it the Gospel according to nature because nature expresses truth and wisdom. Nature never lies. So we can look to nature for truth and guidance and understanding things about ourselves. So the Gospel of Nature, through the plant, shows us that there needs to be a coming into being, a coming into blooming. going through stages, unfolding organ after organ in order for the plant to be and express its seed potential. So is it not the same with us? We have something of a plant nature to ourselves as well, and like a plant, we have to do in order to be. We have to do something in order to be something. We sometimes have to do more in order to be more. But the real question that I'm kind of revolving around here is what sort of doing are we to do in order to establish our being, our beingness? When we look at the words of René Descartes, which we did in a previous session, I think, therefore I am. It really struck me first time I realized that in the sentence he uses one word twice. He uses the word I twice. And in the first instance, he's referring to his doing. I think. There's a doing in thinking. So that first I is his doing, and in the second instance of the word I, he's referring to his being. I am. I think, therefore I am. So thinking was what he was doing to establish his being, his beingness. But what kind of thinking was he doing when he penned those words? He was thinking in such a way that he was able to know something of himself. That was what the thinking really brought closer to him, was knowledge of himself. He thought, therefore he was. And this is the kind of thinking we're focusing on here in this program, Empathy with Nature, Thinking Like a Plant. We have this capacity, this I am capacity to first know ourself, to truly know ourself, hopefully, through a certain kind of thinking, and then we can expand this capacity to know things beyond ourself. And this is what will lead, this is where this is going to lead to eventually knowing more about nature, how to know more about nature. And even though Descartes' thinking was coming from a place of doubting, because in the original text he said, dubito ergo cogito ergo sum. I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am. And even though that set a tone for the philosophy of science that followed him, this really threw a pall of doubt over our current times, where philosophically thinking, there's no grounds really to say that we know anything for sure. There's still this doubt about knowing. Although it hasn't stopped science from trying to know and barreling ahead, endeavoring to name everything, map everything, categorize everything, and even control everything and anything in the observable environment. We've basically got science on steroids these days, trying to know and understand everything. But are we really knowing nature in that way? The true nature of nature? Do we even know our own nature at this point? And the potential capacities of our nature, including our capacity to know. Do we really know our capacity to know? That's kind of a golden question here. Do we know our capacity to know? We know one thing for sure. We do have this knowing part, the knower, which stems from both the being and the doing. We can know through this being and this doing. And the content of this program is about enabling the knower to truly know more, perhaps even more than what modern science currently is capable of, because we're taking a different approach than modern science, as I think you're seeing. And this other kind of knowing will also ennoble. It'll enable, but it'll also ennoble our being, our beingness, through this different kind of doing activity. But we have to be clear from the outset that this is all accomplished by a different kind of doing. probably quite different than what we've been taught at school, and what we've been practicing so far. So what we're doing here is all predicated on a different kind of inner doing, which is why the first two exercises I've given so far in the first two sessions, this being the third session, I'm referencing from Rudolf Steiner's book, How to Know Higher Worlds, right? This is a how-to book, how to do, which is how to open ourselves in a safe and correct way to higher dimensions of existence. How to correctly and safely open ourselves to higher dimensions of existence that lie beyond the reach of the five senses. And our five senses are the organs that nature has given us to be able to navigate and to know the physical realm, right? But here we have an opportunity to develop other organs of the inner life. So we can inwardly access other dimensions and know more about them. And to be clear and definite about this, this is not an expedition into La La Land. Maybe you're hoping for that. But sorry to disappoint, that's absolutely verboten, going into La La Land. It's about being able to observe and know how these other dimensions, with their other principles and properties, manifest here in the 4D realm of space and time. And I hope you're as enthusiastic and excited about this as I am. I'm really pumped about this. It's like what Michael Jackson once said. This is it. This is it. So first we need to review the seed practice, because the way it's laid out really holds a lot, indicates a lot. And as I said, you may assume it's just about sitting in silence, being with a seed, and trying to sense the life potential within it, detecting something of an aura to it, and perhaps even some coloration in the aura of the seed. And then optionally comparing it with a non-seed to see if you can feel the difference. But that part of the practice of just being with the seed is actually the last part of the practice. But if we want to get to the most power out of the practice, we need to do the first part first, another different kind of interaction. So we have to do something before we can truly be with the life of the seed. We need to become inwardly active in a certain way. So the steps are, I've broken them down into 3 steps. The first step is what people would normally do, and that is just look at a seed, right? To study it in detail with their eyes, with other physical senses. And that is the basis of Newtonian science, right? To just observe and to look at the details, to name them, categorize them. And so when we get to repeating this exercise, we'll do that as the first step, looking at the form, the color, and other properties of the seed. Then step 2. This is where we start really doing something more than just observing and describing. Steiner asks us to think. But what Steiner is asking us to do is not just any kind of thinking, the thinking you use to do your banking and make shopping lists and figure out your smartphone. That's utilitarian thinking, practical thinking, and it's great we have a mind that can be used that way, but the mind can be used in other ways too. And often that practical thinking is very wandery as well. I mean, you may have gone out into a garden or a forest and find that your practical thinking is thinking about your shopping list and paying your bills and your smartphone, and you can't wait to get home and check your emails. That's not the kind of thinking you want to have when you're out in a garden or a forest. That's distracted thinking. But Steiner knows that the power of thinking is far more reaching than that. And he's building off what Goethe laid down in his work decades before, where we can develop our mind in certain ways and use our mind. And this use of the mind we're working towards is really could be considered the most spiritual thing we could be doing. For Steiner, thinking is the key to the kingdom. And in this case, you could say the key to the plant kingdom. And we know from Descartes that this thinking capacity is very much connected to the I, to the self, to the true ego nature. So Steiner gives us some sample thoughts to think, to get us going in the seed exercise. And the thought to think is something like this. I'm quoting from the text. This seed, if planted in the ground, will grow into a complex plant. And before you assume that Steiner suggests that we just superimpose our ideas on this tiny little seed, watch what he does. He says, we visualize the plant. We make it present to us and in us. The plant that's going to come from the seed. We visualize the plant. We make it present to and in us. We build it up in imagination. He's telling us to use our imagination, to use mental picturing, so to visualize what the seed will be when no longer a seed. Now I ask you, when were you ever taught in science class to use your imagination? I don't think so. To use the powers of the mind to do mental picturing. I wasn't. I used to get in trouble for being a daydreamer. And I wish I had a science teacher like Goethe who would have brought together for me the analytical capacities of science along with the imaginational capacities and approach in sciencing. Then I might have been considered a good student because I was good at imagining and dreaming, but instead I was made to feel kind of dumb in science class, and maybe that happened to you too. You really weren't being called upon to use the fullness and integration of your capacities. So what's exciting about this sort of interactivity is that it draws on more parts of your being, on more parts of your inner life, on more parts of you as an evolving organism. And as I stated last time, in order to think like a plant, we need to follow a plant's example. The example of how a plant, stage by stage, from seed to fruit, is continually growing new organs. Right? From seed to fruit, it's producing new and different organs at each step of the way. Humans don't do that in their physical body. We come with all our organs complete, but not a plant. It is going through a metamorphosis into different forms of organs. So we need to follow this example, not outwardly, but inwardly, in our own growth and evolution, to continually grow new organs, organs of inner perception. And this is what this exercise is promoting, and getting us to exercise our capacity to build up a picture of the future plant in our imagination. This is the kind of thinking Steiner is promoting. You could even say a revolution in thinking, or a spiritualization of thinking processes that employs more than our day-to-day discursive mind and way of thinking. So as you might be starting to see, this imaginative thinking stands in contrast to the dry didactic thinking that can be, that way is often used, this one-sided didactic thinking, in working with a quantitative, objective approach to science. It's dry, it's didactic, and this is what Newtonian science follows primarily. But if you observe thinking, you will see there is meant to be a feeling component to it. There's always feelings really naturally involved in the thinking process. It's not dry and didactic and rigid. There's a feeling component or a felt sense that accompanies our thoughts. And so to work with imaginative thinking requires some of our emotional intelligence as well. Our emotional intelligence. So you can remember what you were doing with your mind when being told bedtime stories as a child, if you're fortunate enough to have bedtime stories told to you. While you were hearing a bedtime story, you were creating pictures, movies in your mind, right? And there was a felt sense accompanying these thoughts that you were generating, right? Mommy or daddy's reading a story, you're creating mental pictures, you're using your imagination, and there's also a felt sense accompanying these pictures or these movies in your mind. This is the same direction we are going here. Actually, to recover this lost capacity that was there more naturally as a child until we had it educated out of us. So in the book we're getting this text from, this exercise from, Steiner gives us another thought to think to accompany the images we're creating and generating. And this is what leads to an enhanced ability to distinguish between something that has life potential in it as opposed to a copy of the seed. Right? We want to enhance that ability through this interactivity we're getting into here. So he says the thought we can think, you can take this as a suggestion from the text. What I now visualize in my imagination, this picture we built up, forces of earth and light will later in reality draw forth from this small seed. But if this was an artificial seed, an artificial copy so perfect that my eyes could not distinguish it from the real seed, then no forces of earth and light would ever be able to draw forth such a plant from it. So through this power of thinking feeling, we can call it, thinking feeling combined with the imaging, which, as I said, does not mean we go off into La La Land or fantasy land, but is as true as possible to the objective reality that the seed will become a complex plant. We are already getting in touch with something of an invisible reality. We are beginning to bridge over into the invisible realm, the invisible part of total reality. In fact, Steiner goes on to say, quote, thoughts and feelings should now focus on this invisible reality. It is important to emphasize that whatever we think, we must also feel with intensity. Time should be allowed for both the thought and the feeling united with it to penetrate. So, I hope this is getting clear for you, the new kind of activity that we need to engage with if we're going to enable and ennoble the potential capacities we have that will allow us to connect with the invisible reality. We picture it and we feel it, and then we focus on that aspect of our interactivity and let that work upon us and penetrate into us. Here's another important point he makes. He's telling us to allow time, to be patient. Why? What's going to happen? Well, he says in the text, the invisible will become visible. The invisible will become visible. Then he wraps up this step, the second step, with the following key statement. If I were unable to think, then what becomes invisible? If I were unable to think, that what later becomes visible could not announce itself to me now. It's all predicated on this different kind of thinking, this different kind of interactivity, this thinking, feeling, imaging. If we were not able to do that, then what is the thing that's going to become visible later, the full plant, could not actually reveal itself to me now. But it can reveal itself to us now. That invisible reality can reveal itself. The being of the plant can actually announce itself. I love that word he uses, announce itself. It's like, hello, I'm here. Knock, knock. Plant me in the ground. I'm waiting to come through. So what he is saying is that you could not generate this sort of experience without utilizing the powers of thought in this particular way. Thinking in the way prescribed here is the key to manifesting this sort of experience. Through this kind of use of the mind's power, it can catalyze or bring on these sorts of super sensory experiences. Super sensory, meaning beyond the sensory. So here we are underscoring the sometimes missed part of this exercise, that we build up the thoughts and images in our minds with as much clarity of thought and emotional intensity as possible. And why? This is the part that may tend to get people to run from the room going, quackery, quackery. But what Steiner is pointing to here is that thought substance, the substance of your thoughts, is what builds up these inner organs of the inner life. These thoughts that you work at, you do something to generate thoughts and images, that is actually substance that's used to build up new organs of perception. Just as physical substance builds up your physical organs, right? Mashed potato and gravy builds up, the organs of the physical body. But thought substance is what we need to supply to build up these organs for the inner life. And what a revolutionary concept that is. This blows my mind and then actually puts it back together again. So let's go on to the third step, and then we're going to do this practice again. It's only after we've done this previous step, the second step, that we can go on to the third step, the final component, because our inner organs have been brought to a place where they're capable of a new perception. And here Steiner says in the text, if this is done in the right way, then after a time, perhaps only after many unsuccessful attempts, we become conscious of a new force within us. This creates a new perception. End of quote. When we do this the right way, perhaps failing time and time again, eventually we'll become conscious of a new force within us that creates a new perception. Whoa, that's something to look forward to. Then he goes on to say, once we've done this step into this realm of the invisible, there we might see auras, colors, and even a sense of a living flame associated with the seed. Whereas the copy of the seed would not provide that sort of experience. You wouldn't sense the same kind of aura around a plastic copy of the seed or this glass thing. But that would be kind of the payoff of doing the work, is we would have this revealed to us, a sense of auras or a flame and such with this. So now I want to address what might come as skepticism around this, right? And he does this too. In his writings, he likes to anticipate the skepticism people are going to have, because naturally, the modern mind, it's like, well, I don't know about this aura thing or sensing a flame. The skepticism might be that Steiner is front-loading us here in the text with the suggestion that we could possibly see colored auras. And that is, suggestion might actually get us to generate this experience falsely, right? Or just to make it up, to dream it up. Or you could say to just imagine we are seeing colors. Well, I just want to say I've been studying Steiner's work for over 40 years. And I can say that he has no interest whatsoever in leading people into a delusional reality. Okay? His stated intent is to guide people to connect with the spiritual in themselves, and then to be able to connect the spiritual in themselves with the spiritual of the world. And that's exactly what we're doing here. And quite frankly, either this stuff is empirically real or it's not. And in the case of this sort of approach, the Goethean approach that we're doing, we are just going to have to research and discover this for ourselves. Because we can know things like this empirically. We can know these things empirically, but on an individual basis. Individually, we can know things empirically. And this approach is what Goethe called delicate empiricism. Delicate empiricism, which I'll explain more about in a later session. But this is to empower the individual in doing research in ways that the current scientific methodology would not offer, would not consider of value. All right, so let me just take one more moment to summarize these steps, then we're going to step into it. The three components of the seed exercise segue one from another, where we start from the place of our senses. We start with our senses, observing and describing the physical phenomenon. Then we move from there, where the work is not just in examining the seed, but the seed becomes more of a point of departure, actually, in working with our own thoughts. That's where the focus shifts now, is to your thoughts about the seed. And you begin working with your own thought substance about the seed. And we build up a thought about the life potential of the seed. We visualize it, what it would look like in full bloom, and what that would feel like. What that would feel like, something living. And we did that in the first session. We sat with something that was living, a living plant, and we sat and contemplated something that was a dying plant. So we've already awakened some of that sense of what something living would feel like. So this is kind of building off the first exercise we did. So with the seed, we visualize inwardly the future plant, building up a thought-feeling image, and this all becomes the substance to fashion new internal organs of sight, the same way a plant fashions new organs step by step in its development. One last thing must be said before we do this, and this is what Steiner said about seeing the colors. And I'll quote again directly from the text. It must be strongly emphasized that we do not see what are here called colors in the same way that we see colors with our physical eyes. Rather, through spiritual perception, we experience something similar to the impression made by physical colors. To perceive blue spiritually is to feel or sense an impression similar to the one we feel when our physical eyes dwell on the color blue. All right? So there's a distinction. We're not going to see this acorn turn blue. It's really an inner perception and sense of blue that would be akin to what we would feel if we actually saw a physical color of blue. And this may take a bit of work to get your perception to this place anyways, where you're not looking for colors around the seed, but you have an experience or impression of a color that is super sensible. So this will all become clear with experience. So enough talking about it. It's time to shift into other parts of ourselves and do this seed exercise. You may want to stand and stretch a little bit just to get your energy flowing. Maybe water yourself with a sip of water, because hydration is good when doing this kind of work with intensity. And you also need to get a piece of paper handy with some crayons or pencil crayons for the art part afterwards. All right, so to begin with, we're instructed to be with the seed, to observe it with our senses. Just describe it to yourself, its form, what is the shape, the colors of the physical object. Yeah, so you're really just being kind of with the Newtonian approach to a physical object. But now we're going to move into step 2, where we start to generate thoughts about the seed. So it's the thought activity that's important. So we could say, okay, if we planted this, it's going to grow into a plant. It's no longer going to be this seed here in my hand or on the table. It's going to become something else. It's going to crack open, grow, start to flourish. It's going to go through different stages, different organ development. Visualize that. You want to think it, feel it, and visualize it. And if you know what kind of plant seed you've got, you could, try and visualize that. But that's not necessarily the most important part. It's really generating thought, feeling, image. You think about how the forces of earth and light will draw this plant out. This plant you're now seeing in your mind's eye. You also recognize that the non-seed would never be able to do that. So the seed has something to it that the non-seed doesn't. And it's this something to it that we want to connect with, we want to see in our mind's eye. We want to make it present to us right now, as Steiner says, making that future plant present to you right now. The seed contains something in it, and we want to connect with this invisible reality through a thought, feeling, image, which in a way becomes the portal to the supersensible reality. That's where our focus is now, more than the seed. So if you need to close your eyes even for a moment to build up that image, idea, and feeling of the future plant. And allow that plant beingness announce itself to you now. See if it announces itself to you. And then lastly, the third step is to become aware if there's a new force within you. Not so much the seed's force, but is there a new force within you, a new organ that has grown from the practice that is enabling a new perception, which might include a sense of an aura, flame, colors around the seed. Just be with that. See if you can feel that in yourself and see anything. This third step, you're really focusing back on your inner life to see if the first two steps, where you generated thought substance, feeling substance, and images, developed a new force within you, a new organ, allowing for a new perception that might detect something of the supersensible nature of this plant, the seed, and can announce itself to you at this present time, even though physically it's still just a seed. And then when you're ready, you can turn to your paper to draw any kind of impression, or even perhaps write down points of your experience that can be shared. All right, so let's have a little time here to hear some reflections or even questions. As I said in the beginning, this exercise has more moving parts than might meet the eye at first, and it took me a while to really break it down and see the segue from one step to another. And that's why I wanted to repeat it tonight, to make sure that people really grasp it and can do it properly, because that's what's going to produce the results. If you're just doing it kind of in a lesser way, you'll have lesser results.
A green sprout breaking through the soil at the top, and could actually feel the sun of like what it would feel like to come out and, you know, feel the sun for the first time and how it wants to reach for that.
Okay, so that was the second step. Yeah, building up in imagination.
And then when I was holding it, sort of in the picture, it started as orange, and then it kind of turned into like a purple aura that I felt.
Okay, purple aura. Great. And so you were having a supersensory experience based on the development of a supersensory organ. Mm-hmm. Did you feel this new force that offered this new perception?
Wow, I could feel a type of energy that was different.
All right. Hallelujah. Doing it. Great. Glad to hear. We got a winner here today. Well, we're all winners, but that was very clear. That was very lucid, your experience that really spoke of the steps that we're trying to master here.
Yeah.
We're going to do it again with a different object in a moment, but so we'll actually be repeating in a similar way with a different object, a third exercise that he gives in the text. But, you know, we're getting more familiar. We're just learning to get more familiar with this approach of Goethean observation. Goethean observation named after the work of Goethe, whom we'll be talking more about in the next session, and Goethe's relationship to Newton. But we're now going to look at one more exercise from Steiner's text that is a complement to the seed exercise, this time working with a mature plant. So we have to have an actual plant before us, just as we had an actual seed. But I want to express a word of warning that Steiner gives after laying out the seed and plant exercises, an important stipulation that he makes, which makes this whole thing even clearer what we're trying to do. He says, we would be committing a serious error with far-reaching consequences if we believed that we could reach our objective more easily by dispensing with the actual object of our meditation and simply forming a mental picture of the seed or plant that we then held in our imaginations. Right? He's saying you can't dispense with the actual object and just imagine it. He says this path, or that path, the path of doing it without the object, may lead also to results, but it is not as sure and proven as the one presented in this book. For the perceptions we attain in this way often turn out to be delusions of fantasy, and we must then wait for these to be transformed into genuine spiritual vision. Right? So if we're dispensing with an object and we're just imagining the future of this plant, the future of the seed, It could become delusional or just fantasy that we are entertaining, and it's not necessarily going to open the gateway to connect with the being of the plant, the supersensible being of the plant, which is the intention here. That this work creates a portal to connect with spiritual beingness. So, yeah, this is what he says about working with an actual object. And this is more proven to produce genuine spiritual vision as opposed to made-up fantasy, which can often happen very easily. And many people fool themselves into thinking they're having genuine spiritual visions, but it's just kind of made-up stuff and potentially leading them to delusional conclusions. So then I'm going to read a line here that really sets things into perspective. The point of these exercises is not that we arbitrarily create perceptions for ourselves, but that reality creates them in us. I'll read that part again. The point of these exercises is not that we arbitrarily create perceptions for ourselves, but that reality creates them in us, creates the perceptions in us. The truth must well up in the depths of our own inner life. But the ordinary I, the I am, should not be the magician who conjures up the truth. The beings whose spiritual truth I seek to behold must conjure their own truth. That's a big thought to swallow. Does anybody want to repeat that back to me? What he's saying?
Giuseppe's good with that, right?
Yeah, Giuseppe, you able to mirror that thought back?
These things.
Sure. Yeah, so Steiner basically is saying that if we do the exercise with a mentality of a completely egocentric attitude, so everything is about my ego, everything is about I who am doing it, then it will lose the other half of the whole point, which is an otherness, an other being that's working with the I am, the ego. And in this case, it will be the spiritual, let's just say, essence of the plant that's not, incarnated into the physicality, let's just say. And overall, like his caution and all of these, it's really about achieving a kind of coordination between the self and the other, and engaging in a mutual spiritual activity, instead of become overly one-sided, become overly egocentric, or sometimes no ego at all, and which can happen with a lot of other exercises, which is not this one, but I personally know a lot of exercises can kind of eliminate the engagement of the ego. So what Steiner wants to achieve is really a balanced point of the self and other, and both have to be spiritually active. Hope that helps.
Wow.
That's it. Yeah, both have to be spiritually active. Otherwise, it'd be like sitting in a coffee shop and you're just doing all the talking and you're putting words in the other person's mouth as if you know what they're thinking and saying, and you hear nothing from them. You just got like a two-dimensional placeholder sitting there and you're just projecting stuff. He says the I should not be the magician, projecting these things to, create an idea of what's there. But the being whose spiritual truth I seek to behold must conjure their own truth within us. Once we create the environment within our inner life, then the object, the being behind the object, or in the object, however you want to put it, can reveal itself to us within us. Just saying. This is really profound. Thank you, Giuseppe. And even though we are doing something to be with the plant, we are thinking thoughts and building up images with our imagination. We don't actually conjure up the being itself that we wish to know and connect with. It is the being who conjures itself before us for us to behold. So, all right. We're going to now work with an actual plant rather than a seed. And there's a few plants around here. So just to give you an idea how this runs again, step one, we observe the plant with our senses. We note all the details we can with what Goethe calls exact sensorial observation. So this is really the object method, to have exact sensorial observation. And then we're going to begin to think about the plant, building up thought substance, and using one of our great untapped powers of the mind, which, in a word, imagination, which we're going to look more at in the upcoming sessions to see its use in our inner work. Because this is what contributes largely to the development of living thinking. The use of imagination is really what contributes to living thinking, as referred to by my mentor, Craig Holdridge, in his book, Thinking Like a Plant, a living science for life based on living thinking. So to get us going with this, Rudolf Steiner again offers an example of a thought sequence, which you'll notice is in a way the opposite to the seed exercise, because we're now working with a mature plant. So I'm going to give you the quote from the text so you hear it in his words, but then you're going to produce your own thought in a moment. Quote, "A time will come when this plant will wither and decay. Everything I now see will then no longer exist. But the plant will have produced seeds, and these will become new plants. Thus, again, I become aware that something I cannot see lies hidden in what I see. The plant form with all its colors will soon no longer be there. But the knowledge that the plant produces seeds teaches me that it will not disappear into nothingness. I cannot see what preserves the plant from disappearance, any more than I could see the future plant in the seed. There it follows that there is something in the plant, too, that I cannot see with my eyes. But if I let this thought live within me, and the appropriate feelings unite with it, then after a time a new force will grow in me and become a new perception." Bingo. And then he goes on to say that this new perception, we may again experience something of a flame form in the plant, but a larger one than experienced in the seed. He also says that when we have reached this stage, we have achieved much. We have achieved much. We have acquired new eyes and new sight that allow us to see not only the present being of the plant, but also its rising and passing away. We can see things of which our physical eyes know nothing. We have built within ourselves what he calls intuitive vision, which of course would make Goethe very happy and makes the right complement to the Newtonian way of analysis and logic. So, and again, he does mention something about colors. When it comes to colors, that these colors are not physical, but the impression of a physical color, but in a supersensory way. Okay, let's begin with our exact sensorial observation of this plant. I have no idea what this plant is called, but that's not the point. Be with the details, the physical details of this. The height, shape of the leaves. We can look at the the stalk. Oops. The way it hangs, it's got a very interesting way of hanging there. I'm not sure if that's normal or not, but doesn't matter. We're tuning into this being, this living being here in my home, who's made this its home. Seems to be, doing all right. So now we do as he instructed with our thought life, right? Now we need to really focus on our thoughts, where we think to ourselves, a time will come when this plant will wither and decay. Everything I now see will then no longer exist, but the plant will have produced seeds, and these will become new plants. Thus again I become aware that something I cannot see lies hidden in what I see. The plant form with all its colors will soon no longer be there. But the knowledge that the plant produces seeds teaches me that it will not disappear into nothingness. I cannot see what preserves the plant from disappearance any more than I could see the future plant in the seed. Therefore it follows that there is something in the plant too that I cannot see with my eyes. But if I let this thought live within me, and the appropriate feeling unites with it, then after a time a new force will grow in me and become a new perception. That is step 2, generating thoughts, feelings, and images. So imagining how this is going to die, wither, but then rise again. There is something ongoing about this being, despite the fact that its physical body is going to die. And now that you've worked with your thoughts, you may sense a new force, a new perception within you that could even allow you to see something of the aura of the plant, a sense of coloration upon it, around it. Perhaps the sense of a flame, as with the seed, but only larger this time. And most importantly, you feel that force within yourself. You feel that you have created or generated a new organ of perception within your inner life. And when you're ready, you can again get a piece of paper and journal or draw your impression. As this is really something to do repeatedly to build up these new organs. As Steiner says, the point of these exercises is not just to daydream and fantasize imaginary things. Yes, we do need to engage the imagination. This is kind of the catch-22. Are we just imagining these things, or are we imagining these things? Depends on how you use that word imagine. And to realize that the imagination is really an underdeveloped, underutilized part of our being, part of our capacity, part of our thinking, feeling, cognitive capacity. So indeed, we do engage the imagination to generate thoughts about the plant. And this gets the ball rolling, so to speak, as we generate this thought substance. But he stipulates that it would be a completely different exercise if we did not have an actual object in front of us. And the reason for this is exactly as he states, that the intention is not just to conjure up spiritual experience based on wishful or magical thinking and to have make-believe friendship with a plant. No, he says the intention is that the true nature and being of the plant is then able, as a response to our efforts, reveal itself in truth in us. and we
Can
follow.
I insert a relevant
Oh, please.
point? Yeah. So Steiner actually made another remark in kind of like the difference between real imagination and the kind of cleverness of modernity. So I feel this is a good point to clarify what's the difference between what Steiner means by capital I imagination and what society in modernity
Nice.
often think as imagination.
I like that, capital I imagination as opposed to lowercase I.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a really important point, and I was actually going to go in a similar direction here as we start to wind this down. Because this is overcoming this Cartesian dualism that we're experiencing. Cartesian dualism being the split, the alienation between I and other, not I. Be it, a person, be it a plant, be it an animal, which is leading to Cartesian anxiety, right? That's why I sprayed everybody with this anti-Cartesian anxiety spray when they come in, because we're stressed. We have this unconscious sense of alienation and separation, being in a bubble. And of course, this is important that we have a sense of the self. This is very important that we have a sense of the self and our own thoughts. But now we have to learn how to bridge over this dualism and overcome this sense of disconnect and separation, especially from the true nature of nature. So what we're doing here is building this bridge between our I and that which is outside of the I. And in this case, it was with the being of the plant. So as a result of what we're doing here, we could actually add to Descartes' famous words, I think, therefore I am. We could add, I think, therefore I am able to reconnect to everything that is not I. I think, therefore, I am able to reconnect to everything that is not I through the development of my thinking and spiritualization of my imagination. There you go, Descartes. Hope you're not rolling over in your grave or wherever you are. That is taking him from a place of doubt. He said, I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am, to something more of a certainty, that through the development of the thinking capacity of the I and the spiritualization of the imagination, the I can then think its way into a reconnection with the not I. And this, as Michael Jackson once said,
Is it?
this is it. So, as we begin to wrap up this session, let me once more repeat this quote from Goethe. I've given it a few times now, maybe you have it memorized. If we want to behold nature in a living way, we must follow her example and make ourselves as mobile and flexible as nature herself. You've heard this each time, and then I've asked you to do a self-test. Ask yourself, okay, how mobile and flexible are you in your inner life? 0 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. What number spontaneously comes to indicate your current state of inner mobility? You got 7 again.
Yeah.
That's what you had last time.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, still, I guess you got some work
Yeah.
to do the practices. We're just learning the practices now. To do them, I'm going to give the nature play assignment in a moment. But before that, I want to close with some words. Don't worry. Be happy. I say don't worry if this seems a bit overwhelming and is all very new to you. I was a bit overwhelmed when I first read these words over 40 years ago, when I first acquired this book. But I've continued to come back to this text and continue to come back to these practices as I see the wisdom in the path that's being laid out here. So much so that I am now teaching this path in the work that I do. This is a safe and sure path that works. And it takes will to make it work. So don't worry, be happy. Don't let the foreignness of this overwhelm you. You can review this video and you can get a copy of this text to read yourself. If you want to get a copy of How to Know Higher Worlds, highly recommended. We're studying it in the Spiritual Boot Camp. And you can take your time in building up yourself in these new ways. You go to the gym a few times a week to build up. Well, now you can do this as kind of an inner gym to build yourself up. So don't worry, be happy that you're being exposed to some truly golden learning here and things to guide you on the modern spiritual journey. So before we take a break and then turn to some music making after the break, I'm going to give the nature play assignment for the week, which I'll post in the chat as well as on the Empathy with Nature webpage on the powerforconsciousliving.com website. So the nature play assignment is to contemplate every day a plant as per the example given in this session. Observe it with exact sensorial observation. Then build up the thought about how the plant will one day decay and perish. But using the imagination, see there is an invisible part, a beingness that will carry on and rise again in a new plant. Use this thought and image to connect with the true beingness of the plant, allowing it to conjure itself before you to behold. Part 2 is to try and capture the experience on paper, drawing some of your impressions or journaling them, because this actually furthers the exercise and the powers of the imagination. Part 3, you want to continue with these practices from the ones from the previous sessions as well. You've learned the seed one before, and you've also in session 1 learned about being with a living plant and then with a dying plant and feeling the difference. And then the 4th exercise is, of course, Rakshao. Take a few minutes every day to review the events of the day in reverse order. View yourself from an objective, higher perspective going through your day. What do you learn about yourself? This is a way to strengthen many things in yourself, including mental picturing, memory, and the power of empathy, which is so important. We'll be talking about that in a future session as well. All right. Well, time for some refreshments, and may the forest be with you.